Okay, we are live and recording. This is Ian MacKenzie from The Mythic Masculine, welcoming all of you here to this second ever roundtable discussion. And I'm going to turn off Amber's mic there. I think there was a bit of feedback, Amber, on your side. I just muted you for now. Yeah, I'd like to welcome you all to this conversation as part of a sort of unfolding series on different subject matter that's topical to the day, bringing in different guests who have compelling and important perspectives to offer and to illuminate, hopefully, these issues in new and interesting ways. And so I'm delighted to be joined by the three guests that you see on screen here with me. I'm going to turn it over to them in a moment to offer a little bit of their own bios, a bit of their story, and their relation to this topic of looking at the frame of white fragility. And first, though, I'm going to ask Christos, who's currently in my bottom square below me, but might be different for you, to offer a little bit of the intention about, maybe how this conversation came about, what stirred it, and to set a certain way of approaching this topic today. So over to you, Christos.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Hey, everyone. I'm sure there's familiar faces out there. Thanks to Shay and Amber as well for joining us this afternoon. So yeah, it's a good prompt. The seed for this, I believe, came when Ian posted a YouTube video of Robin DiAngelo giving a talk in Seattle. I think it's her most popular YouTube clip on this topic. And from what I understand, when Ian had watched that, his first reaction was like, this is great. And when I first watched it, my reaction was, oh my God, what is this? So we got into it a little bit there. And then we're like, oh, we should have a talk about this, because it was clear that maybe we weren't understanding maybe why each other were reacting that way. It's probably been a couple months since then, but the seeds have been there. And it resulted in this. We've started doing this, our second kind of roundtable discussion through the Mythic Masculine here, with varying guests, including myself. I won't be part of all of them. We'll have different topics and different people coming through. So the seed is, this body of work, White Fragility, that Robin DiAngelo has developed over several decades of corporate diversity training, her own kind of education. I think she has a master's, if not a doctorate, in this field. And then, of course, especially this summer, kind of maybe kicked up another notch after the George Floyd murder here in the US, but obviously around the world to more or less degree, of the topic of race and racism and how to address that. There's been a huge upswing in, I think, people's passion and wanting to do something about it to address this issue. And Robin DiAngelo's book hit the bestseller list for nonfiction on Amazon around that time. It stayed there for quite a while. It's not there anymore, but it's in the top 20 last time I checked. And I think the hope for this space, this hour that we're together, and for those of you watching later, is to try to have a space where we can passionately engage with this topic of how do we dispel racism, prejudice, and racialized prejudiced behavior in our communities and in our culture, and how do we go about that in an effective way, and how do we go about that in a way that builds momentum, builds alliances, allows us to organize efficiently and to actually reach these goals, which are various but revolve around this desire to make our communities more equitable, more humane, more nourishing for everyone. And in this case, it would be people who are racialized for their ethnic or racial identity. So that would be the goal of what we're here for today. And I'm hoping that we can engage with our various backgrounds, experiences, insights, the wisdoms that have been shared with all of us, because I know all four of us. This is a topic that we spent a fair amount of time working with and contemplating, organizing around. And so maybe I'll start segue into a little bit of my background, and then Shay and Amber and Ian, maybe in that order, can share their background and how they come to this topic. So I'm a child of Greek immigrants on both sides, political refugees on both sides, who came to Toronto separately and met there. I grew up in a Greek diaspora community in the middle of an extremely multicultural urban Toronto, and grew up with almost everyone that I knew being first generation, with parents and grandparents from another country and another culture, another language often. And so I think my experience has actually been quite unique in North America, which, especially compared to the States, where there's a lot of segregation along racial lines, and often a core kind of white majority. And what I've been understanding in my lifetime is my Greek is, kind of at a child level's vocabulary, and my nieces haven't picked up any of it, is that I'm the generation that's being assimilated into whiteness. My parents came here, they were not white. My nieces will grow up in a fully white kind of paradigm. And I'm the generation that is transitioning, that is being assimilated into that. So I think for me, it's the experience of, I feel like I have insights on how that happens, because it's happening to me over my lifetime. And so I'm interested in how whiteness is conjured, how people come to identify with it, and what we might be able to do to make that less so. Because I think part of the issue with race and racism is the identity of whiteness itself. So maybe I'll pass it on to Shay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shay Au Lait, and I'm a queer Black woman, first of all. So that's the beginning part of my interaction or engagement with this topic. And I have been an advocate all of my life, like an advocate for the underdog, because I have had to speak up for myself. I've had to speak up for myself because I was raised in a religious cult on the south side of Chicago. I grew up in the quote unquote hood, right? The parts of Chicago none of you should go to. And that was my early childhood, getting kicked out of that cult. Also going to a college that's like 97% white, and I chose to go there. But having that experience of not being Black enough for the Black students, and but being too Black for the white students. While in college, I explored what's considered socio-political theater. And it's this idea that art, whether it's theater or music or dance, could truly transform how we even approach and take action on social issues and political issues. Like, there is a concept, or no, an actual thing called legislative theater that is used to change laws. And because of that power, that's how I have used issues of like race to explore. And when it comes to even the concept of like white fragility and my relationship to this term, like I'm just ready for what happens next, right? Whether it is a given or not, there's more work to be explored. And I've always wanted to find creative and sensual and playful ways to explore the concept of race. And that is hard to do when it's such a volatile topic, when the label just gets thrown up, white fragility, right? Like, how do we get past the defenses to even find a playful way to explore race if we just keep getting stuck at this part of the conversation? And so that's how I've found myself here. Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Shay. And thank you for Ian for having me. I'm really grateful to be here and to be present to this process. So my background is in art. I graduated in about '05 from Art Center College of Design, and about a year into exhibiting with money funded from my tribe, I realized there was no community in that. There was no making a difference in that. There was only apathy sort of built into this narrative of my life. And I had a series of spiritual crises that prompted a huge value shift. So I kind of call myself an artist turned researcher. And I've been deeply invested in the research and unpacking of where do I find myself in the midst of this culture and what do I do about it? I was adopted as an Indigenous Chumash woman into a white family and was raised by a teacher and a cop. So it's very interesting. Yeah. So by the time I hit my 20s, it was just like, oh my God, there was so much to unpack about my own experience and in relationship to this world I find myself in. But that being said, I feel that there's this word of co-creativity that feels very turgid and alive for me when it comes to the topic of decolonization. Like, how are we going to actually be about this? How is this going to be an engaged thing that's not prescriptive, moving beyond this homogenized world that's constantly reinforcing complicity? And anyway, so I've been about the work of regeneration as an omnidirectional stewardship care. Like, I'm so interested in experiences of peak care or deep care. Like, how do we care for intend to ideas and how they outpicture themselves? How do we care for the presence and dynamic of children as ancestor and forecestor? How do we care and tend to the power of the seed? How do we have bioethics and protect clean air, clean water, clean soil? You know, basically bringing in the dynamics of living for 7 generations without harm as a meaningful bridge for sort of, as this old world is dying, how can its nutrients, as it's being deconstructed, inform the creation of a new one? So that's the territory I find myself in. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Amber and Shay and Christos. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I've been a documentary filmmaker for about 13 years now. And I think early on I recognized it was a way of engaging with the times in a meaningful way. I think I largely concentrated on what I understood to be like the edges of emergent culture. So whether that was, the Burning Man gathering or heading to Japan after the Fukushima partial meltdown and looking at, how the Buddhists were responding to that crisis, to looking at the rise of the feminine, in this case through the lens of female DJs and producers, and also through the first year of the Occupy movement. I worked on a film with another director, which looked at this interweaving of love and action, like, where did they intersect and what.
It's going to be hard if Ian's not.
He froze.
Anybody think they know what he was going to say?
I don't know. And I was getting ready to write notes down because I liked this quote about the intersectionality of love and action.
Oh man,
He's coming back.
Well, until he comes back, should we just?
Well, until he comes back, there was something else I wanted to mention about what led for me here. After the George Floyd murders, or murder, there was a white woman on Facebook who had posted about going to a forum where it was supposed to be a discussion between all races on what was going on regarding Black lives here in America. And she was like left to, hi, Ian, I'm just giving a quick little story, but she was left to feel powerless after walking out of that conversation. Like when I asked her just what happened, she said she felt shame and guilt. She didn't know what she was supposed to do, and she didn't know how to fix anything. And so she just felt powerless. And I knew in that moment, like that was a problem for me. Like in order for us to connect and to heal, I need everyone at the table to walk away feeling empowered. Like if the white people at the table who walk away feeling shame and powerless, I can't do anything with that. Like we can't do anything with that. And I remember that led to me asking, is there a space for like even newly woke white people to be messy, to be able to say some things that might be a little offensive as they're exploring these concepts, or just to be able to say some stuff that might be just not PC friendly. I mean, not disrespectful, but just be able to talk some things out without walking away feeling powerless. And I need to create spaces like that.
Thanks for that, Shay. And Ian, I know we lost you for a bit, but did you want to continue? If you can remember where you were at. Oh, is he frozen again? Yeah. Well, he's out on an island off the coast of BC, so maybe the weather is
we may have to also figure out what we may want to do just as an alternative to keep the conversation going if the internet continues to be a challenge.
I have a suggestion, which might just be our next thing. Based on what we've all shared and what we get from Ian, was there any threads that seemed already like kind of thing between us that we want to maybe just start unraveling a bit more? Because we don't have any particular, I mean, I think we should probably talk about white fragility at some point, because people probably logged on around that. Although we should just teach a workshop altogether, because I think there's already so much wisdom here, and I love the energy and excitement that I'm feeling, hearing more from the rest of you in terms of where you're already at and your approach to these issues.
Yeah, I'm happy to offer some ground, unless Ian is back.
How's that now? Do I sound okay? Am I coming through?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I did catch a lot of that. It's but yeah, the internet's been really funky all morning. Thank you. Yeah. And for the addition, Shay, that you offered there. I feel happy. I could if it hopefully it stays live. I could quickly skirt the link that I'd been making before, and then maybe you can weave back in if that feels good for everyone. Yeah. I can't remember where I cut out when I was sharing a bit of my story, but just to say that I'm very intrigued by, what are the stories or the narratives and the ways in which we can create change on, intimately and also on a mass scale through, I mean, for me, largely it's been film, but also again, conversations through kind of crafting conscious memes, from this like mimetic level, those of you familiar with that. And so that's what I bring to this and this fascination. And also, really grappling with this question, what does it mean to be an ally in this time? And especially as one like I have with, again, a high degree of privilege, if you look at all the boxes. And so how to engage meaningfully, how not to get caught in traps, though, where things feel like they're allyship, but they're actually not. They're not that helpful. These kinds of things are just very alive for me. So this is why this discussion, I'm so excited to be here. And so I feel like maybe it is a moment just to say a little bit about the frame of white fragility as I understand it, just so again there's a bit of a baseline for the audience as well as for us here. That sound good? Yeah, great. So again, I'm gonna sort of say up front that on the one hand, I don't consider myself a sort of really, I don't know, I don't have a doctorate or something in racial justice or things like that, but I do feel like, again, I've been engaged in a meaningful way in many different realms, and particularly from being around Indigenous ceremony and speaking to Indigenous elders in different contexts, which has been more the local community where I live, the sources of wisdom and perspective on this, and also reading lots of different sources and of course watching films. And so when I encountered Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, I think for a long time I had sort of avoided it unconsciously or consciously. Because I'll just say right from the outset, it feels a bit, it feels very volatile. Let's say as a white person, to see something that's basically going to tell you things about yourself that you're not going to like hearing, which seems to be exactly, quote, what white fragility is about, right? That the inability to be with uncomfortable truths, let's say, about how we are or act or see things or create oppression, all these things. So I feel like there was some sense of, I don't know if I want to watch this. And then I eventually did. This is the talk at Seattle, I believe she gave a couple years ago, which is sort of a long form talk, about 90 minutes or so, to a crowd there. And she, I believe, sketched quite an overview of the white fragility framework. I think the book had been out. It might have been the actual book release event as well. So I will say I haven't read the rest of the book. I mean, I've done more research on this. I have friends, particularly in the Bay Area, who are very, I would say, involved in both, bringing Robin DiAngelo to events and things, and also kind of putting forth that this is a valuable framework. And so for me, I'll say the talk initially, it was confronting, but it was also felt a bit of a, if I say it now, I kind of, oh, this is what's going on. That kind of epiphany, it felt like, of, this is why there's so many problems. And the way I would characterize it, at least again, sort of brutally broad stroke, is a kind of sort of a almost like a trap of, if you, as a white person, if you think you're not racist, you're definitely racist. Right, like that's kind of like this is how I sort of unpack it a bit now, because the whole culture, the whole system is racist, and for me, again, I see it as obviously an understanding of systemic oppression, oppression and racism that is built into the system, and I'm not arguing that. I think that is true, but there's something within that framework that felt this kind of like gotcha, thing, which is, if you don't believe this, then you are an example of what the thing is trying to point you towards, right? So that's to me where it starts to get a little dicey, and I feel like I don't know a lot of the critiques that have come forth because of this, certainly from people of color as well, about what their critiques would be for this. I do want to just name, though, that I think there is critiques that have come out, I think largely from white people, and people like, I don't know, Ben Shapiro and others, who are very, I would call them, they are very reactive critiques. I feel that I don't believe this is where we're going in that sense. I do believe there's critiques that are kind of like trying to say that this doesn't exist, and all the privilege doesn't exist, and all this stuff. And I don't think necessarily that's what we're speaking to, but I want to differentiate the critiques that again, from those that are highly reactive to the thing, and then something else, a different way of seeing, a different perspective, which is what I think we're inviting here. So I'll just leave it there. The confrontation, the encounter with Christos after the fact, when I posted it too, and him being kind of like laying out a few strong words about what he thought about the framework, definitely piqued my curiosity. That there was, I trust a lot of the things he talks to and learns about. And so it definitely invited me to say, wait a second, maybe it's not the thing I thought it was, and maybe the fervor around white fragility as a kind of, we found the universal cause, maybe isn't that, and how might we wonder about it differently. So that's how I'd say lay the carpet a bit for I'd love to hear now from everyone what stirred from that.
I can just hop onto that. Yeah, I completely agree. I felt it never quite landed with me, because I felt like it was a blunt tool out of a witch hunt. Like, it felt like there used to be this test for seeing if someone was a witch, and if they drowned, they were a witch, and if they didn't drown, they were a witch. I'm just like, I feel sort of the same kind of prescriptive brutality in the theory of white fragility. And I more so resonate with Dr. Howard Thurman's statement of like, the experiences of unity between people are more crucial. And
we're losing everyone.
Oh, no.
The Empire is listening in. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think one of Robin DiAngelo's assistants is probably got into the wiring somewhere.
Oh, Amber, you back yet? No. Hopefully she can come
Yeah.
back in.
All
Maybe
right.
Shay, you want to jump in? Yeah.
Yeah. So I studied communication and specifically rhetoric, which is like the art of persuasion. And so when it comes to language, I understand a certain sense of semantics, right? As I hear even the thought about like either you are racist or if you think you're not, then you probably are as well. I think when we go a little deeper, that conversation has now expanded into like privilege, right? I don't think that every white person is racist. I do think every white person is privileged in one sense or another. And I think that that's the core of it. So if we, and again, even the concept of white fragility is kind of about the discomfort and defensiveness that white people have to topics of race, right? But that's also just the human condition. We get defensive. If we can also just move past that part, this is getting at the concept of like how we've been comfortable in our privilege. And then that lends itself to, yeah, like, do you want to be an ally? Do you want to just keep enjoying your privilege? Do you want to take it even further to being an anti-racist? I don't think every white person has to be an anti-racist, but I'm grateful for those that are.
I can pick up off that, and hopefully we get Amber back. Thanks, all of you. Yeah, there's a lot there, and it's almost like it's just lately that I'm even beginning to be able to articulate almost what I've viscerally felt for a while around her work. One big epiphany came from listening to the Racism Recovery podcast by April Dawn Harter, who's based in Colorado. She's a biracial Black identifying woman who I guess just a year ago started what she called the Racism Recovery Institute. And she started working with mostly one-on-one clients. She's a clinical social worker. And what she's already found was like, racism isn't even the thing. Narcissism is actually the condition, is actually the thing that we're dealing with here. So she's already, even though she's probably an Aries like me, she's already kind of changed the name of the Institute like a year into kind of launching it. So now it's the Narcissism Recovery Institute. And hers was the first explicitly strong and quite, I think, well-argued critique of DiAngelo. And it was coming from a very knowledgeable and strong Black woman, kind of perked up my ears. So at that point, like Ian said, I think most of the critiques that I heard were very reactive. And what she actually, and the podcast is down, I actually can't find the episodes now, unfortunately. But there was one specifically on the topic of white fragility. And she straight up said, this is abuse. You know, that thing of, if you do this, you're racist, if you do this, you're racist, that's called gaslighting. You're actually not allowing any space for anything other than the category to be inscribed on a whole swath of the population. And what she is arguing, which I agreed with, was that it's not so much Robin DiAngelo's intent or even the theory, it's the context that she is coming up about it, which is that she has spent her life being employed to administer corporate diversity trainings in workplaces where the participants do not consent to taking this. They have to through their work. And even if it's offered, I think we all know that if you're the 2 white people out of the 100 that don't attend the diversity training in your office, that's probably going to affect your sense of belonging within your community, within your organization. So if that's the context that she procured her data that she's made this theory out of is based on people attending her diversity trainings to some degree against their consent, or at least pressurized to attend this. That's very different from someone choosing to go to Dawn Harter, a therapist, and asking for support to deal with their racism. And so it's not a surprise to me that she probably got a lot of blowback from her participants in her workshop, and that she's formed an experience around race and white people that is quite biased. Because I think if you get anybody into a space where they feel safe and they feel that the person is curious to better understand them, I think most people, to some degree, have the capacity to start, working with some of this material. If you're there under the gun and your employment depends on you being there and your sense of belonging depends on you being there, it's setting up probably just more trauma, if anything. And often the diversity trainings that are given that have hired her are not so much dedicated to anti-racism, they're dedicated to legally covering their ass. So there's a lot in here about corporate, the corporate world and liability, as I understand it. And so for me, it's almost like the very core of her work and where this come from is already coming from a really compromised quality of relationship. And I think the reaction to that reflects almost the problem at the stem of her, I think obviously well-intentioned passion for this topic.
Yeah, thanks. Welcome back, Amber, as well. Did you want to jump in on that, or is there one piece you wanted to finish off from your previous offering?
Well, I came in halfway, so it doesn't feel fair to just jump in. I will say that I think I left off with just feeling this remarkable prescriptive brutality, kind of in that, oh, we have a name, we have something to call, and this is what it is. It's like, it just feels like a false sense of security of being able to talk about it, because it's just like we have a nomenclature of how to describe something, but it feels like all it's doing is prompting shame. And how is it not perpetuating that, really? And I was saying before that it feels almost like a test in a witch hunt, that if a witch is a witch, then she would drown, and if she was a witch, then she would not drown also. Like, both of them are correct. So if you're saying this is not me, then that's you. Yeah. So I'm feeling the bluntness of the tool of it. I think that I will say that, like, I agree with Dr. Howard Thurman. I was saying before that these experiences of unity are essential, experiences of togetherness and vulnerability, but I won't say unity as a blanket statement, because you can't just have this notion of kumbaya and all this just being together and living from the point of our shared humanity without also unpacking trauma and intergenerational trauma at that. Yeah, I'll just say that much for now.
This is a great piece. Shay, did you want to jump in on that? There's a question too somebody asked on trauma, and but I wonder if you're
No, I just, my feelings on, like, whether even just the whole concept of white fragility, like, is it abusive or is it brutal? I mean, even if it didn't have a label, it is a thing, right? Like, if you bring up race to someone who's in privilege, for some people, they're going to get defensive, they're going to, like, shut down, or something's going to happen. Similar to if women or non-binary people speak to the privilege of men, like, then men are going to, some will feel away. That's how we have terms like mansplaining and all that kind of stuff. And then these terms are used, of course, to help us understand the general concept, just like we said, or Christoph, you said that white fragility, in a way that this is gaslighting, right? We can use any of these terms in a brutal way. We can use them just as a way to try to make our point, right? Sometimes people have said, accuse someone of gaslighting when really that wasn't the case. And then there are times when it's true. White fragility is the same concept in that way to me. And it's like, but the point is, how do we get past it? Like, some people get fired up, fragile, uncomfortable with this topic, and like their skin and soul literally can't take it, and they fall apart, and then it centers back on the white person who's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It happens. Now what? Like, that's what I wonder.
Hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, you want to jump on that?
I can bookmark it if you wanted to.
Well, there's a really interesting link to the question Dave asked, actually, and I just want to read it because I think this might be good. Yeah, it says, the Racism Recovery Institute seems to imply that people must have trauma in their past in order to be racist as an adult. Does anyone happen to know more about this concept? Or if I'm mistaken, please let me know. Yeah, I feel like maybe my understanding of this link just surfaces from her talk, or from other sources too, and maybe it's this sense that the problem with white fragility that doesn't recognize the trauma element, it seems to, in a way, like maybe that's where the shame comes in, or the kind of the reactivity to the unencountered or unintegrated trauma that a lot of white people carry, let's say, within their own ancestral lines. I've heard that spoken to a lot in the past as well, that white fragility in a way doesn't, it kind of like corrals off the individual in a sense, or from the individual in relation to a, say, a racist culture, but not from the legacy of trauma that has been carried down, through the pillage and dislocation and all that, which is so much, of course, of European peoples coming over to North America. So again, I feel like maybe that's a part of what's being spoken to here, and I'd be curious if others, wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah, thanks for following your instincts. That's actually a great segue, and thanks for bringing Dave's question in, because that's exactly where I was going. I think the other thing to, I'm going to talk about trauma, but we also have to recognize that trauma is also like the thing right now. And so I don't want to say that, trauma is not an be all end all kind of analysis of everything. It's obviously complex. And right now there's a lot of interest through the culture, at least in my communities, around understanding trauma or trauma informed responses to different issues. I think one thing that I like to kind of ask myself questions of, like, okay, if I change the wording into this, how does my body react? And I'll offer to you guys, instead of white fragility, how does the term veteran fragility hit you?
Mm-hmm.
What did you say? What was the first word?
Veteran fragility.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that, there's a lot of veterans with PTSD. And I'm like, if you want to address the behavior, the antisocial behavior, how effective is it if you come to veterans and say, you have veteran fragility?
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I think there's a parallel process with saying, you have white fragility. It depends upon how much you know or feel in resonance with trauma theory. Because I don't want to say as a blanket statement, everybody of European descent is traumatized, because that's also just like a useless generalization. But I think we are starting, at least many of us, and this is my thing of understanding kind of European colonial history, is that, like Ian said, we can't just choose to sever the behavior from the roots, from the history. And the roots and history of Europe and the process of Europe colonizing itself first, and then taking that template to the rest of the world, I think is vital to understanding why people have this kind of it's vital to understanding why people can be wrapped up in racial prejudice. And it's also important to understand how to address that. And there's many other things to go, but that's kind of my lens that I find has a lot of traction for me. And Amber, if you want to come in on that.
Yeah.
And Amber, can you adjust your computer just a little bit to get a bit more in frame? Is that possible?
I'm on my iPad right now because my computer's
okay. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I've brought this topic up to other Indigenous people, of this idea that the the enslavement of the Black diaspora and the colonization of the Americas, or of Turtle Island and South America, that this didn't occur in a vacuum, and that it may have been rooted in, it could have been rooted in the grain system even. It could, like the way that monetization and how grain states and how war was formed itself. But it could have been even exasperated by the femicide that occurred in Europe, because this is the divorce. This was like the divorce in European cultures from nature. This was the point at which, and I brought this up before, and there's kind of like an aha moment, and I'm not expecting it here, but you know, it's not that. I just really feel that there's something to that needs to be tread upon gently, and not even saying that this is excusing this, but it's just more so looking at like, how do we re-indigenize and rehumanize ourselves, in the process, like plug ourselves into empathy, but in a way that is life affirming, to forming healthy relationships, and to deconstructing racism within ourselves and structural racism in general. But I think it's an act of rehumanizing and of re-indigenizing ourselves to nature in some way. That historically, that's where it was like rooted in, that the brutality was rooted in that.
Thanks, Amber. I wonder if this too might be a place to speak a little bit about Shay and you, Christos, on the work you've been doing with what feels like approaching this issue, or approaching race and contact. It feels from a very different level, or like a somatic approach, is at least my broad understanding. But maybe this could be a moment though to speak a bit about how that came about for you both, and what the experience was like to begin to approach from that lens.
I can preface that, and then I would love Shay for maybe to expand on what we did. I just want to say, as we get into this topic of like European colonization, what happened in Europe, it's like we have to really stretch ourselves and keep a lot of balls in the air, because this also can't become a question of like, oh, how do we heal white people, because it's like there are Black people being shot right now. So it's like we have to hold a lot of pieces, and that takes a lot of us with very different skills. Like this is the way, like Shay said, she doesn't expect every white person to devote their life to anti-racism, and the ones that do, she's grateful if that reflects back what you said. And the same way for me, I'm like, I don't expect every white person to do ancestral healing work, but for those that do, I'm grateful, and it's great. And we need people just on the street, at the barricades as well, taking care of like, this election, actually, the results, being implemented. So it's like we're all needed, and we're needed in different ways. And so I think what Shay and I's approach is almost like, it's not based on identity, it's based on almost like, how do we relate sensually and embodied way to these very phenomena of whiteness and Blackness, no matter who we are, no matter what our ethnicity is. And Shay, do you want to pick it up from there in terms of like kind of what that means for us?
Yeah, I've seen, panel talks on whatever variety of issues of race. There are the diversity trainings. There are just certain things that happen around race. And what I hadn't really seen was it being explored, and it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I just hadn't seen it being explored in a more sensual, creative, playful, and embodied way. A similar way that I see now we explore gender, right? Because remember, my background is in theater and art and movement, and I would see a gender workshop where you're able to really explore it without it becoming about masculine toxicity or the feminine divine. They just were able to play with it and approach it from a different way. Sometimes we have to think about things. Sometimes we need to do the things with our hands. And I wondered if that was even possible because it's such a volatile topic. And Christos and I would just have hours upon hours of discussions around just, we went in so many different directions and places with these conversations, and it would morph into like, but what if we tried this, right? If we could get people in a room to explore race, what kind of activities would we even try? What kind of physical thing could we do? A physical partnered exercise? How can we like, it was just so many questions. And we also asked these questions during a time when we couldn't be physically present. So also, how can we make, and I want to put the preface out there too, that by sensual, we mean your senses, like being present with your senses as an embodied human. And so how do we create a sensual and embodied experience over Zoom regarding race during this volatile time in the world? Is that possible? And we created like this 2-day workshop called Sensing Race. Yes. Yeah. Does that help a bit?
And I think we hope to continue to offer that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, hopefully in person at some point.
Yeah.
Hopefully we all survive to get there, and blessings on everyone who's struggling with that right now.
Yeah.
I think we're both, you know, I'm also coming from performance art, and I think what we both probably believe in is that the more that people are in touch with their bodies and their senses and can track what's happening and what their reactions are, both to the present and to what, you know, Amber said about 7 generations, like all these lines of communication, all these lines of relationship, if you're out there, you're terrified of doing and saying something that's going to offend someone, you're tracking everybody else and not yourself, and that makes you really dangerous. And so we need spaces where people's nervous systems are not on high alert, and where they can be in touch with themselves, with their ancestors, with nature around them, with the non-human around them. And so I think what Shay and I are questioning, I don't think we have all the answers, but I think what we're grappling with together is like, how do we get anybody, regardless of race or gender or any of these identities, which are very important in the physical world, but how do we get anybody to be able to come back, to be remembered, to be in touch with the various wisdoms in their body and, you know, and those who have come before? And I don't know, I'll try to loop it back. I don't know if white fragility is actually a really effective way to do that.
Yeah. I also, I mean, I kind of want to use that to address what Justin wrote too, because you just said like white fragility really isn't the way to do that. And I don't want to assume your gender, Justin. So I'm just going to say they said, like referencing like gaslighting and like how might we use these terms, he, him, to better understand how we can become victims or perpetrators or of systems of oppression. I like, there's just a certain level of self-awareness, empathy, compassion, and grace that I think every day it would help if we actively practice that. Right? Because I can hear a term that, like, of course, I wish people would speak in a gentle, nurturing manner to me all the time, but I cannot control other people. I cannot control the next volatile race book that's going to come out later this year about white or Black people, but I can control myself. And when I hear terms, one, I ask myself, like, first of all, like, am I safe? Right? Am I being physically attacked or threatened in this moment? Okay, I'm safe. It's just a book saying something I don't like. Two, like, is this information, this criticism, this feedback useful or useless, right? Either it's helpful or it's not. And if it's not, then like, let it roll off your back. of course, we don't like that. This person has a big platform and they're promoting a concept you might see as problematic, but still, is it useful or not? Is it true or not? Are you defensive or uncomfortable about your privilege or not? And the same with like gaslighting. So when people talk to me, while I do expect respectfulness, I also don't need to get offended or defensive about anything that they're saying. It's useful or it's not. But I also, because I can control myself as an individual, I can intentionally practice empathetic communication, right? I don't need to be brutally honest because that's a defense mechanism. I can be honest in a way that's nurturing, uplifting, right? We talk about the concept of like calling someone out versus calling someone in, which is now a trend word too. The point is like each of us individually can look ourselves in the mirror and practice self-awareness to calm the defenses, and we can individually practice nurturing communication to others. And then we don't have to get so fixated sometimes on some of these concepts, and we can do the work.
Sparkle fingers. Yeah, thanks, Shay. Yeah, does anybody else want to jump in on that?
I can jump in on that. I would love to see what you guys have been working on, or what y'all have been working on in terms of being embodied and being in your body with this. I'm wanting to see curriculum for kids, pre-K through 12, and this is something that I'm working actively on through my artist residency with the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And I'm considering the first 3.5 hours being about resensitizing and being about being in like journaling near fire, being immersed in water, doing meditative practices, and not so much packing in information into the brain and then regurgitating it back, but having the first 3.5 hours be about time spent with family and breakfast and friends, and then setting intentions and things, but being fully present to yourself as a human being and being in your body so much. But the other aspect that I really like is regalia, so that you can be in your body and you can look at it from a point of animals, and what does the animal have to teach? What are the lessons from the lens of the frog or the cheetah or the whale or the, whatever it is? And how can we get out of these lenses that are human-centric only, as an act of re-indigenizing that isn't saying isn't appropriating from any one culture, but really about play and being in your body. So I resonate with that deeply.
That it makes me want to so when we created our workshop, Sensing Race, we both had a moment of like, crap, now we can't take it. Like, we want to be the students. And the way you spoke, it made me want to, again, just go be the student in the workshop. I think about, again, the hours of conversations Christos and I have had over the pandemic, really, hours upon hours of phone conversations, and a lot of them dealing with race. And we don't agree on several things, and other things we're in total alignment with. He said some things that had me turn my neck, excuse me. And or I've said things like, oh my, I would never say this out loud, but I'm gonna say it to you. And that also then led us to well, how do we again move through this? And even in those phone conversations, he would say something to the effect of can I walk you through this one exercise I've tried, this meditation on beingness. And we would do that exercise on the call to just try another pathway into exploring the concept of race. And it was so good, even on the phone calls, to then do some embodied work together. which led to what we created.
Thanks for that. I miss you.
I know, I miss you.
And yeah, I think, Amber, when you said your desire to do this work with children, actually my stomach dropped. A lot of grief came through, because I realized, because Shay and I are basically dealing with like, what is our essential information around blackness and whiteness? Almost like, as an, come from an animist framework. If blackness is an actual being, what does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? What is, if you run your hand over its exterior, is it scaly? Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it cold? Like, that's when we say senses. We're getting into that because everybody actually, if you take the time, everybody has a sensual map of blackness and whiteness, not black people and white people, but blackness and whiteness, and we can compare them and we can explore them in different contexts. I don't think that will work with children, because children don't know what we're talking about, because they're not born with the concept of blackness and whiteness. That's something that is taught through the culture. What I understand of children is they're born innately with a sense of fairness. They're born innately with the perception that everything is alive and that they can communicate with it and have dialogue with it. And they're born innately without an idea of races. And what seems to happen to us in this culture is, I think we're terrorized into thinking that nothing out there is communicating with us and nothing can speak back to us. We're terrorized into thinking that even though our bodies say that something is not fair, that some concept like race overrides that instinct in our body. And I think that our experiences of trying to negotiate the world and being told that these people are black, these people are white, and that certain experiences are to be expected based on that category, is where this idea of races comes from. And so I'm like, Shay, I don't know what you think.
I don't agree with it. I think that, well, one, we live in America, so from the time a child is born, they're going to be taught about the concept of race.
But they're not born with it.
They're not born with it, but I believe like her desire was like to have work for like children who are alive now, like you said, pre-K or K to 12th grade or 8th, I'm not sure. And what kind of work could be done with them. So every child alive today has some sort of sense of race. And so I believe that can be explored with children. And I mean, again, if you're a Black child, you already get a number of different talks from your parents. And now there are also, I mean, of course, all races do this, but also I'm seeing more like white allies have more intentional conversations with their children around anti-racism or just the history of it. So it's already a part of our culture. And I feel like, again, for children, we would probably be blown away by some of the same activities we did in our workshop, asking like a 10-year-old or a 3-year-old, like, what does whiteness taste like or sound like children in their imaginations? Like, I think it would be incredible.
Well, yeah, beautiful. You want to jump in, Amber?
Yeah, I think that what's behind it or what's governing it is this sense of a different experience of time. And I think I've mentioned this to you, Ian. I feel that as a species, we're getting these feedback loops about our relationships to everything, our relationship to our planet, our relationship to other people. And part of our evolution is probably shedding clock time or time as our experience of time that has something to do with, whatever you can produce will determine your dignity or your ability to be cared for and to be seen in society and to participate. I think that we're in the process of shedding that experience of time to one of synchronicity. And so having flow states introduced at an early age at such an early age, I think could interrupt the very culture that is codifying people towards bias. I think that flow states and really having a basis for synchronicity, meaning like having inspiration-based learning, can codify people, their brains, to a totally different way of being human, to the extent or degree that like these other ways that are about perpetuating harm would just seem so foreign, and just like in the sense of like, does not make sense. People actually believe this way because you could be keeping the tenderness and the gentleness of the child intact by keeping their imagination intact, by interrupting that reinforcing complicity and homogeny. Anyways.
Well, I saw Shay nodding a bit. I wonder if, there's something you wanted to add to that.
Oh no, it was just all so amazing. Like, first off, you should just do public speaking all the time. I just love how you, like, what you're saying. It's so beautiful. I was just thinking about like I like the flow state. Some of the work that I do in movement and art is I have a movement practice that I teach, and it is on like exploring flow and getting into the flow state, which has even led, now I use this through burlesque and pole dancing, like again, the sensual arts, but in the same way that like there are whirling dervish, I'm exploring like pole spirals to induce states of flow to then see what's possible. And so I just, these are things that I believe in, and I can, like the possibilities of children exploring these sometimes even difficult concepts in more inspirational or creative ways. I just can't imagine like what could come from that. Like raising woke and activated, empowered children in the next generation, because even woke is not enough. You can be awake, but like still in your bed. Like, and so I want this for the children.
I love that. You can be awake and still in your bed. Wow. I feel really grateful where we've gone with this, and also keeping track of time. I know it's just after 1. I think some people have started to gratefully drift off with what we've covered. And so I wonder, to wind it down now, to maybe any last offerings you want to give. I know there was this talk of the Sensing Race workshop that you did, Christos and Shay, and I wonder if you want to maybe say where people can find you if they want to connect more with that work. And also Amber, like how do people maybe follow up a bit on what you're tracking?
Amber, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. You can find out about my work at theregenerativefootprint.org.
Awesome.
I am developing a website right now, but for now, christosgalanis.com, or find me on Facebook. I'm pretty active there.
You can find me at shayaulait.com. That's how my name is spelled. And also even the flow state and the movement that I was speaking to, that is called speakeasynoir.com, just to learn more on that too.
I think probably tracking Shay in terms of if we launch another class would probably be a great place. I think I don't want to end on this note, but I just want to share what came up for me in Shay and I's back and forth. And I think this is an example of what we do, is kind of like and it's like then something, and I agree with you that in this country, where we are, US, I don't think you can come to the age of even pre-language without having race infusing you. I agree with that. And what came to me as a memory I was living in a church in Montreal years ago. It was essentially where we were doing a Black youth outreach. And a younger friend of mine, Barkley, had just had his first little girl. She was a few weeks old. I remember he was on the phone somewhere else in the building, and she started crying a lot. I remember running into the office where she was in her cradle and just picking her up and just, rocking her. And I never realized this until now, but it's almost like, I think that's the only few minutes in my life I can remember that I was in a relationship with like a quote Black person where I felt such almost like no defenses, no thing, because I knew that she wasn't reading me as a white person.
Mm.
And there was something in that space. And so when I say like innate, like it's not in children, I'm like, I don't think, maybe in some somatic level, even a couple weeks old, maybe she was starting to, have some embodied concept of race. But for me, it was this brief grace of just being able to be two human beings, in contact without that lens, without that layer between us. And so I think that was what I was going back to. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Did either of you want to chime in on that?
I agree. There's a scene in this movie called Losing Isaiah, I believe, where this white family adopts a Black child, and eventually the mother, played by Halle Berry, wants to get the child back. And so race, of course, becomes the topic. Should the child be with its mom or this white family? And they have a teenage daughter, and she puts her hand up to like the little toddler boy and asks him, what's the difference between our hands? And the little boy says something to the effect of, yours is bigger, right? Mm. And in that way, like that's children. And I also believe, even with race, like being a social construct, we're still sensual beings too. Like one child might say like, well, your skin is coffee and mine is, I don't know, it's mocha chocolate or something. But all of these are ways that we feel into our bodies: size, color, like texture, like those kinds of things. And so again, that brings me back to like then wanting to be intentional and using our senses to explore sometimes these challenging concepts.
Mm. Beautiful. Yeah. Well, seems like a good place to end it for now.
Can we say something about white fragility, or are we beyond that? We're like, that's a great end, but as you can see, there's so much more, and I think there's so much wisdom and so much richness in play. And I honor and acknowledge all of you for bringing that to this topic, and as well as my teachers and elders who have instilled me with different ways of coming to this and not getting stuck and not just going into shame and hopelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I want to say. Like, as much as even you and I have had so many discussions, and even some charged ones, I feel like every single time I leave a conversation with you, I feel empowered, inspired, stronger, more intelligent, even when times like when you challenge my concepts and I can be proven wrong, still every time I walk away feeling seen, heard, supported, and held. And that is so important.
Thank you. And it's absolutely mutual with you too. And that's rare, I think, in this culture. I think it's, we are more than white and Black, but we are identified that way and identify that way. And I think it's an honor to be able to do that with you, and to have both, to be myself and to say what's true for me, and to still feel respected and understood, and also empowered coming out of that. So thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. And thanks, Amber. You want to check in one last time, Amber?
Yeah, I'm so grateful to be here as well, to participate in this. I love your chemistry and being in the nest of that chemistry, Shay. And I really want to find out more about your work as well, and maybe catch one of the two of you the next time you host something. I'd love to be on the pulse of that. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I feel complete, and yes, empowered. Thank you.
Mm. Awesome. Well, I'll just close this out then with once again gratitude to the audience for tuning in, all the comments and questions asked, and this will be posted on YouTube as well under the Mythic Masculine YouTube, which can be shared, wherever you like. And if you want to connect more conversations around masculinity, but also, we jump off to a lot of places, check out the Mythic Masculine podcast, as well as the Mythic Masculine Network, which is network.themythicmasculine.com, where, we go really deep on a lot of these things. And again, so grateful for guests in the conversation, and we will tune in next time.
All right. Thank you, Ian, for holding this up.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.
Happy Friday.
Thanks, Christos. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Shay.